It's not just men defending Ukraine from the Russian invasion. Plenty of women have also done their bit to keep the country safe, with tens of thousands signing up to join the country's armed forces and other forming all-female groups, like the iconic Witches of Bucha, a volunteer unit that's delivered a devastating blow to Russia in more ways than one. There was a time when it wouldn't have been possible for a unit like the Witches of Bucha to even exist. While women have been included in Ukraine's military since 1993, they were largely barred from most combat roles and only used on an ad hoc basis in volunteer battalions. In 2017, that all changed. The Ukrainian armed forces finally allowed women to enlist in more than 60 different combat positions, and by 2020, women made up more than 15% of the country's entire national force, with hundreds in senior command positions. The 2017 rule change proved particularly timely, as Russia invaded just 5 years later, and Ukraine has needed all the help it can get from that moment on. And while many women have gone all in with the military, signing up and serving on the front lines, some have had to balance their family lives with military duties, continuing to live and work in the homes they've known all their lives, while dedicating their free time to fending off Russian attacks. Best friends Valentina and Ina are two such women. The former trained as a veterinarian before the war. The latter has been a teacher for much of her life. Both are in their early 50s and live in Nemyshieva, a small village not far from the city of Bucha, which was the site of an infamous Russian massacre earlier on in the invasion. There, Russia is said to have slaughtered hundreds of innocent civilians and prisoners of war, including multiple children. A memorial wall has since been installed in the city, bearing the names of more than 500 residents who were killed in the massacre. Valentina and Ina managed to survive. The pair met many years prior to the Russian invasion, after their young sons became buddies at preschool. They started to chat, realizing that they had similar humor and personalities. Our kids hung out, we talked, and soon we realized we were cut from the same cloth, Valentyna explained in an NPR report. Ina added, "We became inseparable. It was like we'd known each other forever." But when the Russians came to Bucha, the two women were forced to go their separate ways. Caught off guard, they did what they could to keep their family safe. Valentyna and her family took shelter in their basement, with frightened neighbours soon rushing to join them. "There was barely enough room for us," she remembers. Ina meanwhile fled the area with her family, driving around 60 miles away to another village where her grandparents had a small hut with a stock of firewood, a cellar and potatoes. The Russians never made it to that area, but they got very close to Valentyna, who was forced to spend over a week in the basement as the sounds of slaughter rang out from above. Even now, talking about it, I remember the desperation. All that sorrow and anxiousness is still just beneath the surface. Her son was just 8 years of age at the time. Not knowing if the next day might be her last, Valentyna sent a message to Ina, begging her to look after her little boy should the worst case scenario occur. Ina explained, "She told me, if anything happens to me, please take in my son and raise him. And I told her, of course I will. And then I said, Valentyna, my dear, I promise you we will raise our children together. And thank God, that's what we're doing." Countless other women have endured similarly harrowing experiences over the course of the war, like Tetiana, who lives in Irpin, a city of around 65,000 people, some 16 miles from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Very early in the invasion, in March 2022, Russia's entered Irpin and occupied parts of the city, and Tetiana's life turned upside down as the men who were closest to her were forced to enter the fray. Her brother, a police officer, began transporting supplies to soldiers, while her husband, Alexander, who had worked as a journalist up to that point, quickly enlisted in the military. Tetiana had met Alexander at a group for car lovers. Both were divorced and had daughters from their previous marriages. They soon bonded, but when the Russians came, their touching story came to a tragic end. As the enemy forces drew nearer, the Ukrainian government ordered an evacuation of Irpin. Tetiana rushed to pack some supplies for herself and the girls, while Alexander gave her a final hug, saying, "My task is to save our city, yours is to save our children." It was the last time she'd ever see him. She and her daughters rode evacuation trains to western Ukraine before a friend helped them emigrate to Spain. Her husband called daily to begin with, but eventually the calls stopped coming, and Tetiana soon received the news that Alexander had been killed. The very next day, she was informed of the death of her brother. Not long after that, Ukrainian troops managed to force the Russians back and out of the Kyiv suburbs, and Tetiana made the brave decision to head home, leaving her daughters in the safety of Spain. She wanted to do a bit for her country and her people, becoming an advocate to help those who had lost loved ones to receive benefits and support from the government. She also took on an active role in transporting supplies to frontline troops. All the while, she was still struggling to accept the terrible loss she'd endured. I was going through a very tough time. As time went by, the Russians began to once more ramp up the pressure on Kyiv and the surrounding areas. The country began to use drones with increasing regularity and ferocity, at first sending dozens and then hundreds towards the city to strike the likes of residential buildings, hospitals, schools and civilians. As the attacks intensified, Ukraine did all it could to strengthen its defences. The Bucha Territorial Defence, for example, decided to set up an air defence unit made up of local people who were willing to spend some of their spare time scanning the skies and shooting down the drones. Tetiana was scrolling her phone when she saw an ad for the unit, making the decision to sign up straight away. I immediately dialed the number, I got an interview and then the job. She wasn't the only one. Valentina and Ina also saw the same ad, and both were eager to get involved. Valentyna explained, "We were just sitting and crying at home, and that's no good. And now we've got skills. We know how to hold a gun, how to shoot a gun. Maybe we don't know how to kill the enemy, but that's coming up next." Now, all three women are part of the almost entirely female Witches of Bucha unit, so called due to the badge one of them wears, depicting a witch-like figure wielding weapons. They work regular jobs during the day, and the members include a real estate agent, a nanny, a pastry chef, and a manicurist, as well as several doctors and teachers. But when night falls, the women don their combat uniforms, strap on their helmets and boots, and load up their rifles. They leave the safety of their homes and step out into the dark, taking up positions in the forests around Kyiv, armed and ready to fight back against the Russians. Side by side, they scan the skies, listening out for the distinctive buzzing sound of approaching drones. When they spot one, they open fire, doing their best to bring down as many Russian Shaheeds and other drones as they can. Each one downed represents a victory for the witches, one less drone that might otherwise have blown up a local residence, killed or injured some of their neighbours, or damaged local infrastructure like hospitals and energy stations. The vast majority of these women have almost zero military training. Many had never picked up a gun before the war began. Some are in middle age and far from the peak levels of physical fitness and conditioning one would expect of a soldier. Yet they don't complain. Day after day, night after night, they lace up their boots and do their bit to save lives and protect their land, juggling their drone-busting duties with family ties and professional obligations. As Valentyna, now also known under the call sign Valkyrie, puts it, "I'm 51, I weigh 100 kilograms, I can't run. I thought they'd send me packing, but they took me on. I can do this work. The kit's heavy, but we women can do it." Ina, now known as call sign Cherry, agrees. "It's scary, yes, but so's giving birth, and I still did that 3 times. Ina also explains how she sometimes has to hurry back from shooting drones in the woods to give a math lesson to a student. "I keep my clothes in the car, my heels, I put on some lipstick, teach the lesson, then it's back in the car, quick change round the corner, and I'm off. The guys have gone, but we're here. What can't Ukrainian women do? We can do everything." The women also have to make do with only the most basic of equipment, since all of the best and most modern weapons have to go to the troops on the front lines. That leaves the witches with Maxim machine guns dating all the way back to the 1930s and ammo boxes stamped with Soviet red stars. The guns are so old that Serhiy, the only man on the team, is tasked with pouring bottled water into them as they fire to prevent them from overheating. But the unit, just like Ukraine as a whole, has done the best with the equipment at its disposal. It faces extreme adversity, but continues to defy the odds and has numerous confirmed drone kills to its name. Those involved are also becoming more proficient with every passing week. Most weekends, they head out to partake in a range of military training exercises, covering everything from storming buildings to improving their aim at the firing range. Bit by bit, they're gaining valuable military skills that may just help to save not just their own lives, but those of their fellow Ukrainians in the future. Of course, they're highly unlikely to ever see serious frontline combat, but they're playing a vital role in defending their country from within. Unlike the majority of his troops, the unit's commander is a man, Colonel Andrei Valentyna. Valentyna has spent time on the front lines, battling in eastern Donbass, which has been one of the hottest zones of the conflict since the invasion began, and even beforehand. He describes the scenes there as being like fireworks non-stop, and he's no stranger to being in charge. He used to have around 200 men under his command, operating an array of mobile air defense units across the Bucha region and carrying out nightly patrols. But when Ukraine overhauled its mobilization laws to reinforce its ranks, many of the colonel's men, who had previously been ineligible to serve at the front lines due to health or fitness issues, were suddenly sent away. Valentyna explained, "About 90% of my men ended up in the army and another 10% hid, scattering like rats. We were left with barely anyone, just men with no legs or half a skull missing." At that point, he had a choice. He could either replenish his ranks with men below mobilization age, perhaps even including teenagers, or he could recruit women. He opted for the latter. At first it was like a joke, let's take women. There wasn't much trust in them in the armed forces, but that's really changed. Now, Colonel Valentyna is happy to lead a mostly female squad and proud of their accomplishments. These are full-fledged forces of defense of Ukraine, and thanks to these women, today, most of our energy, most of our homes are intact. And right now, the Witches of Bucha are more needed than ever before, because Russia has gone all in on drone warfare in recent weeks and months. July alone saw more than 6,000 drones launched into Ukraine, a record high for the war so far. June also saw staggering quantities of drones, with some attacks involving hundreds of Shaheeds and other drone types speeding towards Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities over the course of a single night. With their limited equipment, the Witches are only able to bring down small amounts, but every little bit helps, especially with Ukrainian air defenses coming under increasing pressure. It's terrific for morale too. Ukrainians across the country and even beyond can hear the stories of units like the Witches of Bucha and take heart, knowing that people of all ages and genders are stepping up to the plate, picking up weapons and doing what they can to keep the nation safe. And while the Russians and their callous leader Vladimir Putin ramp up their summer offensive in a bid to break Ukrainian resolve and crush the country's morale, the Witches continue to defy them. Their actions, like those of their fellow countrymen, prove that Ukraine isn't buckling, bending or breaking no matter what Russia throws its way. It remains strong and steadfast even in the face of overwhelming adversity. As for the women themselves, many say that joining the Witches of Bucha has given them a new lease of life, a purpose and value that many felt they had lost when the war began. Many, understandably, still struggle with the trauma of all they've endured. Some have lost husbands, brothers and sons, as well as other friends and relatives. As Valentyna explained, "I remember the occupation, I remember the horror, I remember the screams of my own child, I remember the dead bodies when we were fleeing." For women like her, the unit has become a life-changing form of support. "Life has changed, all our plans have been torn apart, but I'm here to help speed up the end of this war. As our girls here say, it won't end without us." For Tetiana, meanwhile, the Witches have helped her emerge from an indescribable state of grief and loss, bringing her back from the depths of despair and transforming her into an active, engaged member in Ukraine's defense. As she puts it, "This unit is our medicine," adding, "With my girls, I feel alive." Another member of the group, a 50-year-old woman named Ina, expressed a similar sentiment in an interview with the BBC. "Under occupation, I felt the utter pointlessness of my existence. I could neither help anyone else nor defend myself. I wanted to learn how to use weapons so I could be some use. Another, named Olena, agrees. I didn't want to just hide in the basement. I wanted to join and help. I wanted my family and children to sleep well. Another woman, who remained anonymous, remembers hiding away with her children as the Russian forces drew closer, forced to helplessly wait and wonder when the soldiers might find them and what they would do to her little ones. Now finally, she feels empowered. Coming here really helped, because I won't ever sit like a victim again and be so very afraid. And like so many military units, be they made up of men or women or a mixture of both, the Witches of Bucha have a strong sense of camaraderie. Many are close friends and keep in touch with one another during the days when they're not out hunting for drones. Tetiana describes her fellow witches as her second family, often meeting up with them at the movies or going for food and drinks at local cafes and restaurants. And when one witch has a problem, the whole group bands together to help her. My car broke down recently, and one of my sisters just gave me her car and said, "Take it and drive it as long as you need to. I've been driving it for weeks now." The women's families are also very proud of their female relatives, as Ina explains. "Our sons are proud too. They brag to their friends about us." And the Witches of Bucha aren't the only female fighters playing their part in the fight against Russia. Earlier this year, Ukraine opened recruitment for a new all-female drone unit, nicknamed the Harpies. The unit will be part of the Ukrainian drone systems forces, including men in support roles, but with women taking on the positions of drone pilots. Those accepted into the Harpies will first undergo 45 days of basic training, followed by 30 more days of specialized instruction, before being deployed, using FPV drones, strike UAVs, ground-based robotic platforms, and heavy bombers, to give Russia a taste of its own drone medicine. So, while the witches bring Russian drones down, the Harpies will launch their own aerial attacks on the enemy. Ina sums it up best. "Look at us now, no longer the hunted, but the hunters." Now you can learn more about recent Ukrainian successes in the skies in our recent video, detailing how Ukraine's armed forces have successfully wiped out multiple Russian radar planes and stations, forcing the enemy to operate blind in key areas along the front lines. Or watch this video to discover how Ukraine is using US-made bombs on Soviet-made jets to deal devastating damage to Russian logistics. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our trusted channel too, if you haven't already, so you can stay in the know and up to date on all important news and developments from Ukraine and elsewhere.